Welcome to another deep dive with us. This time, we're headed to a nation that's facing some serious political turmoil, Georgia.
Yeah, it's a story that's kind of flown under the radar for a lot of folks, but what's happening there has some major implications for well, for the whole region, really.
Absolutely. We've been poring over reports from think tanks, firsthand accounts, and international news coverage, all trying to get a handle on this complex situation. And trust me, this is one you'll want to pay attention to.
Think of it like a political thriller.
Yeah.
You know, high stakes, power struggles, and a whole lot of uncertainty.
Right out of a John le Carré novel, almost.
Yeah.
Okay, so to set the stage, the recent October 26th election in Georgia was supposed to be this pivotal moment.
Yeah, a chance for the people to have their say, right?
Exactly. But the results have been intensely disputed. The winning party, Georgian Dream, secured 54% of the vote.
Which, on the surface, might seem like a pretty solid victory.
You'd think so, right? But they've been pushing some policies that have a lot of people worried.
Uh, yeah, like that foreign agent law.
That's a big one. It's raised a lot of red flags about democratic backsliding.
And it's not just domestic concerns. The international community is watching this very closely.
Oh, absolutely. This has become a real focal point in the global tug of war between democratic ideals and authoritarianism.
A handful of countries, like Russia, Hungary, and China, they've recognized the election results.
Right.
But the U.S. and the EU, they've condemned them. They're citing irregularities and a concerning trend toward, you guessed it, authoritarianism.
And the opposition parties in Georgia, they're not backing down either. They're alleging some pretty serious violations, including voter intimidation.
Oh, yeah. And there's even this thing called carousel voting, which sounds, well, it sounds pretty wild.
Carousel voting, what in the world is that?
It's this tactic where individuals are allegedly bussed between multiple polling stations to vote multiple times.
So they're stuffing the ballot box, essentially.
Yeah, basically. It's a way to artificially inflate the vote count for a specific party. And, whether or not it actually happened on a large scale, those allegations really erode trust in the process.
Absolutely. Now, all of this leads us to a key player in this whole drama, Bidzina Ivanishvili.
Ah, yes. The oligarch in the shadows.
He's the one that many see as the puppet master behind Georgian Dream. And get this, his estimated wealth. A whopping 25% of Georgia's entire GDP.
That's mind-boggling. I mean, think about the influence that gives him, not just in politics, but across the entire economy.
Right. It's not just about campaign donations. This is about controlling industries, banks, the whole shebang.
And no other country in Europe even comes close to that level of concentrated wealth in the hands of one individual.
We spoke to some experts who described driving through Tbilisi, that's the capital, and seeing this sudden surge in luxury cars.
Like a whole new class of elites has emerged.
And it's all centered around Ivanishvili's his lavish hotel, which ironically sits on what used to be called Freedom Square.
Yeah, the symbolism there is pretty hard to miss.
Now, when you factor in Ivanishvili's past his business dealings in Russia, his close ties to Putin, it paints a pretty concerning picture.
Yeah, you start to wonder about the extent of the Kremlin's influence in Georgia.
Right. There's this real fear that Georgia's being pulled into Russia's orbit, and one incident that really illustrates this whole dynamic is what happened when the U.S. government sanctioned a former Georgian official.
Oh, right. This was a big deal.
This official was accused of working for the FSB, Russia's intelligence agency.
And the U.S. hit him with sanctions.
But instead of cooperating, Georgian Dream changed banking regulations to help this guy evade those sanctions.
It's like they were openly protecting him.
Talk about sending a message. It really makes you question whose interests are being prioritized here.
Yeah, no kidding. So we have this incredibly wealthy oligarch with potential ties to Russia, a disputed election, and now evidence that the government's protecting individuals accused of working for Russian intelligence.
Not exactly a recipe for a stable democracy, is it?
Not really. And things get even more concerning when you look at how the government's treating those who dare to challenge them.
One case that really stood out to us was that of a researcher we're calling E.T. to protect her identity. She works for the Atlantic Council, and her focus was on Russian disinformation campaigns.
Yeah, and just 2 days before the election, her home was raided by the police.
They claimed it was a gas leak, but they took all of her electronics.
And then, shortly after the election, her bank accounts were frozen.
And when she asked why,
Silence. Yeah. No explanation whatsoever.
It's like a scene out of a dystopian novel.
You challenge the powers that be,
Mm.
and you face the consequences. And it's not just individuals, it's civil society as a whole that's under attack.
Right, and that's where this foreign agent law comes into play. It's basically a carbon copy of legislation in Russia.
And it's being used to silence any independent voices. What's crazy is that even organizations like dog shelters are being labeled as foreign agents.
Yeah, their excuse is that these groups can't track the origin of every single donation. But come on, that's practically impossible.
It's just a way to make it impossible for anyone who might criticize the government to function.
We spoke to experts who described this atmosphere of fear that's permeating Georgian society. People are afraid to speak out, afraid of being targeted.
It's a far cry from the democratic ideals that Georgia was striving for.
It's really a chilling situation. So we've got this powerful oligarch, a disputed election, a crackdown on dissent, and the looming shadow of Russia.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack, and it raises a lot of questions about what this means for the future of Georgia and the region as a whole. And it's not just about politics, right? This whole struggle for democracy in Georgia, it's also playing out in the economic sphere.
Yeah, we've talked about Ivanishvili's wealth and how that might be, skewing things politically. But what about the broader economy? What's the impact there?
Well, a lot of the experts we talked to pointed to this kind of surprising trend. Georgia's become a bit of a hotspot for Chinese investment lately, especially when it comes to infrastructure.
Really? That's interesting. I mean, on the surface, that sounds like the good thing, right? Investment is usually a positive sign.
It can be,
Yeah.
sure, but there are some concerns about what this means in the long run. It seems like China's stepping in to fill a void left by the West.
Because the West has been hesitant to engage with Georgia as much given the political situation.
Exactly. And some of the deals being made with these Chinese companies are, well, they're raising eyebrows. Let's just say that.
Oh, like what? Give us an example.
Well, there's this massive new port being built on the Black Sea coast. Huge project. And the company behind it, they've actually been blacklisted by the U.S. and a bunch of other countries because of their track record. Let's just say they're not exactly known for playing by the rules.
So some shady dealings going on, potentially.
Potentially, yeah. And it's not an isolated incident. The experts we talked to described a pattern of these kind of questionable business arrangements. That wink, wink, nudge, nudge kind of thing where certain Georgian Dream members or their families suddenly become very, very wealthy.
Yeah, the good old crony capitalism playbook.
Yep. And it breeds this sense of cynicism among the population. Like the system is rigged, the game is fixed, it erodes trust in the government, and that's never a good sign.
Definitely not. Speaking of trust, one thing that really struck me was how many of our experts emphasize the vital role that independent journalists are playing in Georgia right now.
Oh, absolutely. They're the ones shining a light on all this corruption, holding those in power accountable. They're putting themselves at risk to get the truth out.
Without them, we'd be in the dark about a lot of this stuff.
No question. And they're facing immense pressure, intimidation, threats. One expert even suggested that Western donors should think about setting up a dedicated fund to support these journalists.
That's an interesting idea, kind of like a lifeline for independent media in Georgia.
Right, because it's not just about Georgia itself, it's about the whole region. A free press is essential for any functioning democracy.
It's a reminder of how fragile those freedoms can be. And it's not just the media, right? It seems like any form of opposition is being targeted. Remember how the opposition parties boycotted the first parliamentary session after the election?
Yeah, that was a big statement. And the government's response, they threatened to ban all opposition parties outright.
Wow. Talk about cracking down on dissent.
It was a clear power play, a move toward a one-party system. Classic authoritarian tactics.
So what's the mood like on the ground? What are people saying about all of this?
There's a lot of despair, disillusionment. People are leaving the country. Businesses are struggling. One expert told this story that really stuck with me. They were driving through Tbilisi, and they saw this stark contrast. You've got these luxury cars parked outside the Ivanishvili's hotel, a symbol of the newly rich elite. And just a few blocks away, people are struggling to make ends meet, their lives upended by the economic downturn and lack of opportunity.
Wow, that's a powerful image, a real illustration of the growing inequality in Georgia.
Right. And it's not just the economic hardship, it's this feeling of being watched, of
Yeah.
not being able to speak freely without fear of retribution. It's a stifling atmosphere.
So is there any hope? Any reason for optimism about the future of Georgia?
Well, Amidst all of this, you can still see the resilience of the Georgian people. They've faced down authoritarianism before, and they're not giving up easily.
They've got a history of fighting for their freedom. Are there any specific examples of that playing out right now?
Definitely. We've seen these massive protests erupt in response to the government's actions. People are taking to the streets, making their voices heard. It's a sign that they're not willing to let go of their hard-won freedoms without a fight.
And those protests have been getting international attention, right?
Oh, yeah. Putting pressure on the Georgian government and also highlighting the need for greater support from the international community.
Which brings us to the role of the EU and the UK. Georgia has been trying to join the European Union for a while now, and the EU has been a key partner in supporting democratic reforms there. But with all that's been happening, that relationship has become pretty strained, hasn't it?
It has. The EU's been pretty vocal in its criticism of the Georgian government, and they've actually suspended the country's accession process. Basically, they've hit the pause button on Georgia's EU membership dreams.
Wow, that's a pretty strong message. And they've also cut some financial support, right?
They have. It's a way of saying, we're not happy with what's going on. It's like a tough love approach, I guess you could say.
Do you think it'll work? What else can the EU and the UK do to help Georgia?
That's the million-dollar question. Some experts are calling for more targeted sanctions against the individuals involved in the corruption and human rights abuses. Hit them where it hurts their wallets, their ability to travel freely.
That could be effective, but sanctions don't always work, do they? What other ideas are out there?
There's also a lot of talk about focusing on strengthening civil society in Georgia, supporting independent media, providing educational opportunities for young people, investing in the foundations of a healthy democracy from the ground up.
Yeah, that makes sense. You can't just force democracy on a country from the outside. It has to come from within.
Exactly. And there's also a growing call for the EU and the UK to be more proactive in countering Russian disinformation campaigns.
Right. Those campaigns are aimed at undermining democratic institutions and stirring up trouble within Georgian society.
It's like there's this whole information war going on alongside the political and economic battles.
Yeah.
And it's having a real impact.
So we've got the EU and the UK potentially getting tougher with the Georgian government, supporting civil society and trying to counter Russian disinformation. What about the US? What's their role in all of this?
Well, the U.S. has historically been a strong ally of Georgia. But the recent U.S. election has thrown a bit of a wrench into things. The Georgian Dream Party was actually celebrating Trump's win.
Really? Why is that?
It seems like they're hoping for a shift in U.S. policy, a more lenient stance towards their democratic backsliding, let's call it.
So they're betting on Trump being more sympathetic to their approach.
It seems that way, and it raises this uncomfortable question. Will the U.S. under Trump turn a blind eye to the erosion of democracy in a strategically important country like Georgia?
That's a big question mark hanging over all of this. What do you think? Will the U.S. stick to its principles, or will realpolitik take precedence?
It's hard to say for sure. Some people believe that the U.S. will remain committed to its democratic values and keep the pressure on Georgia. Others are more skeptical, pointing to Trump's, his tendency to cozy up to authoritarian leaders.
It's a crucial question, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. It sounds like Georgia's future is very much up in the air right now.
It is. And it's a reminder that what happens in one corner of the world can have repercussions far beyond its borders.
Absolutely. This isn't just about Georgia. It's about the global struggle between democracy and authoritarianism.
Exactly. And speaking of those broader implications, there's one aspect of this story we haven't even touched on yet. The Georgian diaspora.
Oh, right. That's a whole other chapter in this saga. I've heard stories about long lines, frustrated voters, a sense of disenfranchisement. What happened with the Georgian diaspora during this election?
Well, get ready for a story of resilience, determination, and people fighting for their right to be heard.
I'm all ears. Let's dive in. So the Georgian diaspora, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of Georgians who live abroad, many of whom have been, deeply invested in their home country's journey toward democracy.
Yeah, and this election really exposed the difficulties they face when it comes to actually participating in that process.
It's almost like there were two separate elections happening, the one inside Georgia and the one experienced by those trying to vote from overseas. We heard stories about these insanely long lines at polling stations in cities like London and New York.
Oh yeah, people waiting 6, 7, even 8 hours just to cast a ballot.
That's crazy. And it wasn't just the lines. In a lot of places, there simply weren't enough polling stations to handle the number of eligible voters. One expert we spoke to, who lives in Vancouver, went through all the official channels to request a polling station in their city. They were denied, flat out.
It's like they were being actively discouraged from voting.
It's incredibly frustrating, especially when you consider just how many Georgians live abroad. The numbers are staggering.
Something like 250,000 Georgians have left the country this year alone. Add that to the existing diaspora population, and you're talking about a significant portion of the Georgian people.
And these are people who care about Georgia's future, who want to have a say in how things are run.
But they're being shut out. And here's the kicker. The opposition parties, they lost big time inside Georgia. But among the diaspora voters who actually managed to vote, they won by a landslide.
Wow. That's a huge discrepancy. It makes you wonder if the election results inside Georgia actually reflect the true will of the people.
It definitely raises questions about the fairness and the legitimacy of the process, and about whether the government is truly representative of all Georgians, both at home and abroad.
But it sounds like the diaspora isn't giving up. They're making their voices heard.
Oh yeah, they're organized, they're vocal, and they're determined to see their homeland succeed. And they're also a vital link between Georgia and the West. They're advocating for democratic values, pushing for closer ties with the European Union.
So even though their votes might have been suppressed, their influence is still being felt.
Absolutely. And the continued engagement is going to be crucial as Georgia navigates this turbulent period. It's a reminder that the struggle for democracy isn't confined by borders.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into Georgia. A contested election, a powerful oligarch, a crackdown on civil society, the growing influence of China, the resilience of the Georgian people, and the challenges faced by the diaspora. It's been quite a journey.
It has. And it's a story that's still unfolding. The stakes are high, not just for Georgia, but for the whole region.
And we hope this deep dive has given you, our listener, a better understanding of the complexities of this situation.
What's happening in Georgia is a microcosm of the global struggle between democracy and authoritarianism. And it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in defending democratic values wherever they're under threat.
We encourage you to keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep engaging in these crucial conversations.
The fight for a better future is an ongoing one, and it requires all of us to be informed, engaged, and active participants.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another exploration of a topic that matters. Until then, stay curious.